live from Geneva, from Atlanta, and from Graz, Austria. This is 24 Hours of UX. We are in hour 18 of the 2021 edition. The clock has just turned midnight here in Geneva. I personally have been up for a long time, but I'm having a great time. And I have the great pleasure of welcoming our keynote speaker for this hour, Sophia Prater, to the stage here at 24 Hours of UX, a global event, which we are sharing with people on 6 continents over, as we have all said all day, 24 hours. We're not through it yet. There's still plenty of good content to come. There's been so much good content all day. Really appreciate that. Shout out to all of our sponsors as well, who've supported this and made this possible, and all the communities around the world who've contributed, and the volunteers. My thanks, personal thanks, and on behalf of the entire committee for that. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Sophia on. She can introduce herself and her topic. If you don't know her yet, you will soon. She's going to be globally famous, probably within an hour. Her name is everywhere. So here we go, Sophia. The floor is yours. Welcome to 24 Hours of UX.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to share my favorite thing on the planet, object-oriented UX. All right. So give me a thumbs up in the chat. Can you see my screen? The very accusatory title saying 4 mistakes that you don't know that you're making. All right, cool. All right, so when I'm talking about these 4 mistakes that you probably don't know you're making, no harm, no foul. If I'm not really super intentional about these things, I make them too. I found some of these on my very own website on OOUX.com earlier this year. So you just got to be vigilant. You got to pay attention, and as long as you know how to recognize these things, it's going to make it a whole lot easier, because awareness is the first step. So, and of course, practicing object-oriented UX, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here, is going to make all of this a whole lot easier. Avoiding these mistakes is really baked into the object-oriented UX process. There we go. Cool. All right. Figuring out how to advance my slides. All right. Presenting 101. Okay. So a little bit more about me. I'm a UX designer. I'm a UX coach. I consider myself the chief evangelist for object-oriented UX. Basically, what I do is I shout about object-oriented UX from the rooftops, because it has been so transformational in my career, and how I've been able to serve my clients and just creating great UX, great intuitive UX with a lot less headache. Using object-oriented UX feels to me like working smarter instead of working harder. I basically can make things, cut out a lot of extraneous complexity through the process. So I wrote this article back in 2015. This is what really got me going, talking about object-oriented UX. A lot of people liked it. I had no idea people were going to throw tomatoes at me, because a lot about object-oriented UX feels like you're turning the process inside out. So I had no idea. I was super nervous to publish this, but it got a great response. It was one of the top 10 articles on a list apart that year. Got a lot of traffic. A lot of cool people said nice things about it. So I continued writing. I continued riffing on it. I continued hammering on it. I continued talking about it all over the world, basically anybody who would listen. And then I started bringing object-oriented UX into companies in the form of workshops. So most recently, I got to bring object-oriented UX to Facebook, Adobe, HubSpot. So more and more companies are bringing me in to teach their design teams. Also have a happy hour, which is a free monthly-ish event. We actually are meeting tomorrow around 5 p.m. Eastern time to talk about knowledge graph. So check that out if you want more OUX tomorrow. Also have a podcast and a certification program, which is where you really can take the deep dive and really jump on the bandwagon, which I will talk a little bit about that near the end of the program. So, object-oriented UX. This is basically a philosophy. It is a philosophy for designing our digital systems that respects the fact that people think in objects, which I'll talk about in just a second. And because people think in objects, we need consistent and recognizable objects to understand an environment or product, which is super easy in the real world. You go into an environment, you're like, table, chair, person. But you go into these digital environments sometimes, it's not so easy to differentiate the things and figure out what the things are here and how they all connect. And that's really what we're going to be looking at. We're going to have a lot of fun today just looking at bad examples of this and basically being mean to companies that are doing this type of thing, but not mean. We're not going to be mean. We're just going to poke a little bit of fun at them because they're going to help teach us. So non-UXers, what we do is we deliberately align our software that we're developing, our apps that we're developing, to the user's real world mental model of these concrete, defined, valuable things, so that that abstract world just can be as intuitive as possible. So this is the secret weapon for breaking down complexity as well. And I'm going to talk about that a whole lot more near the end on how this breaks down complexity. So when I was saying earlier that people think in objects, you might be like, do people think in objects? Is that true? Do they actually think in objects? I'm not going to get too much into the psychology, but I do want to point you toward Medium, where I have quite a few articles on this. This article in particular, I really love. I'm basically interpreting a research study that a linguist did on children and how children learn, and how we know that children in Western cultures, and children especially learning English, are very noun focused. If you have small kids, you know, they're just eating up all those nouns, very few verbs in the beginning. But what this linguist found, to kind of a little bit of a spoiler here, she went and studied verb-friendly languages. So languages where sometimes even the nouns get subsumed into the verb. And she wanted to see if children are still learn noun first, and they actually do. So this is a really fun article if you want to dig into the psychology. This one also is another one that you can really dig into how basically how perception works and all that good stuff. So what I want to differentiate here first is how object-oriented UX is different than a design system. So OUX is not your design system. OUX is going to inform your design system. So if you're at a company that has a design system, or is aspiring to have a design system, or has a design system but nobody actually uses it, OUX can actually help make your design system a whole lot stronger. But here's the big differentiation. Design systems are all about the components and a little bit about how you put the components together, but it's really about making sure your components are really, really consistent, so that you don't have 16 drop downs for no reason, right? Nobody's coming to your website for your components though. Nobody's coming for your drop down. All right. Nobody's coming for your calendar picker. Those are all means to an end. People are coming to your digital environment for the stuff, for the things. What are those things? Does everybody within your company know what those things are? Does everybody understand what those things are? Does everybody at your company call those things the same thing? Or do you have 6 different words for the same thing? And some words, the same words you use for different things. And you wonder why communication is difficult. Right? Okay, so object-oriented UX is all about untangling that, getting really super clear on what are the valuable things within the space, this digital environment that you're offering up to people. What are the things? Why are they coming here? What are those things they want to consume and interact with? It's not the calendar picker, okay? So what are objects? These are the things that have real world value to the user and or the business. And hopefully there's really nice alignment there. So you're going to be looking at mental models or some conceptual models. You're going to be looking at your problem domain. You're going to be looking at your business process model and thinking about what are the things here? What are the actual things? So think people, places, things, and content types. So if we're thinking about something like, let's take the domain of endangered species. All right, we're not even trying to solve a problem yet, just the general domain of endangered species. What might be, go ahead and put it in the chat, what might be some real world things of value within this domain of endangered species? I'll give you one, animals, right? What else? I'm looking at the chat. What else might be in here? I'll give you one more, habitat. Environment, see? Yes, we're on the same wavelength. Ecosystem, food, diet, things that they need to survive. Resources, shelter. I have nonprofits too. We could come up with a ton of things. Donations for saving the whales. Public figures. I was thinking public figures because I recently saw David Attenborough's documentary. Super good. Get it. Good. Just if you haven't seen it, just leave and go watch that on Netflix instead. No, don't wait till the end of the hour to do that. News articles or research studies, volunteer opportunities, maybe charities. Yes, laws. That's a great one. Humans, the predators. Okay, so those are the real world things that then need to be represented in the digital environment, depending on what problem you're trying to solve. So those are all domain objects. You're going to need to, of course, narrow them down. You don't need to represent all of them, just the ones that are going to help users solve these problems. So unfortunately, we UXers, myself included, if I'm not being really intentional, often do a terrible job of creating digital objects that have integrity, that are easy to recognize and easy to differentiate. What we have people coming into our digital environments and they have no idea what the things are. And it's difficult to track those things and untangle those things. And it makes it really hard to get things done. So one I guess, misconception about OUX is that I don't care about the verbs. I don't care about the actions. And that could not be further than the truth. Object-oriented UX is doing that grunt work of making a very, very solid foundation so that your actions are much more intuitive. So users know what they're acting on and they can clearly see the thing and the affordances for the thing. All right. So at the end of the day, most likely your environment is pretty useless if people can't get stuff done in it. But to get stuff done, it's going to be a whole lot easier if it's really easy for them to recognize what the things are in the place that they are in. Okay, so what do we do? What are these four things that I was talking about? There's four things that basically make it difficult for users to figure out what the things are in the space, what the valuable things are in the space. So we've got masked objects. We've got isolated objects, we've got broken objects, and we've got shapeshifters, my very favorite, saving the best for last. All right, so let's jump into it and talk about masked objects, okay? So these are different objects that have identical representation or design. So it's basically two different things wearing the exact same outfit. They're masked, right? You can't tell the difference between them. All right, so here on LinkedIn, blur your eyes and stand back. Okay, we know Pablo's a person, all right, but the Service Design Network, IDEO, and Creativity, these have very similar structure, very similar packaging, yet they are fundamentally different things within the LinkedIn system. And those buttons that all look the same across the bottom, they all do very different things. Following a company is very different than connecting to a person. But if you're fat fingering this and you're not paying attention, these could be very, very easy to mix these things up, all right? Intel. So this is from Sharon Stern, who actually works at Intel. So I'm actually pulling some of these from the OUX forum. This is where people in the certification program come together to talk, and we do a lot of posting on these things, lots of examples. So Sharon found this one on her company's homepage. Homepages are great, especially marketing pages do a lot of masking. I guess in the spirit of efficiency, we'll just create this homepage tile, maybe in your design system, right? Homepage tile, homepage slider, sidebar component, something like that, something generic, and anything can go in it. We can put an event in it. We can put an article in it. We can put in it. So I'm looking at these terms. You got event, innovation, and processor, which is making me think that, like, is that what these things are? You've labeled them, right? But not really, because an event, that's actually an event. It's labeling it as an event. But innovation and processor are actually, you have to kind of reverse engineer it. These are actually topics on articles, because when you click into these, you go into basically the same thing. So what we have here is we have an event and an article. The article's labeled as innovation and processor, but it looks exactly like the event. An event and an article on Intel.com are two fundamentally different things, yet they're wearing the same outfit. All right, we want to avoid that. This is from Zainab. So this is iRoko TV is a popular streaming service in Africa, and she was flabbergasted here because well, one, we have a section for features, and we have a section for featured, and we have a section for TV series. And she said, oh, here's a good example of a masked object. And I was like, well, isn't the stuff under features, aren't those TV series too? No, those are movies. We have movies under something called featured. And she's like, I don't know, why don't they just call it movies? So watch out for labeling too. Often we'll put a label and it's just the adjective, but not the noun. These are featured movies. Just say featured movies, okay? We don't need to be cute here. To tell people what the things are, use your labeling. So if they had said featured movies, that would have been helpful. But still, these look exactly the same. There's nothing different about them. Netflix isn't doing any better. And the thing is, I wish I had some old screenshots. Maybe y'all remember, Netflix used to show movies in kind of a portrait landscape and shows in a portrait orientation. And so they would show, let me get this right, they would show movies in a portrait orientation. They would show shows in a landscape orientation. And that was spot on. I loved that because we think of a movie kind of that, like the movie poster, or back in the day, the VHS, right? So we have that kind of metaphor going in our head, while a show being landscape, yeah, exactly, Arthur. Yeah, it shows like horizontal TV screens, exactly. Or even just the metaphor that it's longer, right? So you can use things like that just to kind of, and then keep it consistent throughout. And it helps it make it really obvious what's a show and what's a movie. Because here, top picks for Sophia, no idea, is just I don't know how to pronounce that, is Love, Death, and Robots. Okay, it says new episode, so I know that that's a show. Arrested Development, okay, let's use Dairy Girls. No idea, never heard of it. Is it a movie or is it a show? I don't know. And then when we go into these like details, so the detail, you can kind of use your deductive reasoning to figure it out, because I can say, and you don't want your users to have to use deductive reasoning, right? Okay, just we just got to label things properly. But if I do use my deductive reasoning, I can say, oh, this, let's use Love, Death, and Robots, has 2 volumes. Two volumes? I'm guessing that's the same thing as seasons. Again, more deductive reasoning. Or is it maybe a movie that is in 2 parts, like, Forrest Gump back in the 90s? You have the 2 VHSs, right? Is that what a volume is? So, but this is 3 seasons, so that I know it's a show, 2 volumes. Now I'm a little bit confused. I think, it says new episodes. So yeah, okay, it's a show. And then limited series, but I've got more stuff going on here. We've got seasons, we've got volumes, we've got series. What's the difference between these? So we got to keep our labeling really consistent and really clear for the user, so they know what the things are. If y'all haven't seen this one, I'll just let this one sink in for a second. All right, so Michael gets credit for this, for finding this on Twitter and recognizing it as a real world masked object. So what we want to remember here, the packaging, that's your UI, your components, your design system. That is not the stuff. That is the packaging for the stuff. Okay? The substance, that's the stuff inside. That's just the valuable stuff that your user came for. Did they come for fly and insect killer, or did they come for canola spray? Or do they come for both, but they just want to make sure to know the difference between them within your system? And is there a relationship between those? We'll get to that in a second. So what you want to do, though, is you want to figure out what your valuable objects are first. Don't design the packaging and then back up into your objects. That's like designing the bottle and then being like, well, I don't know, is ketchup going to go in this, or is laundry detergent going to go in this? How you design it is going to matter what's inside of it, right? So figure out what is the stuff that's being packaged. All right. So then after you figured out the stuff that's being packaged, then you can design an ergonomic, good, with your good intuitive design to make sure it's ergonomic and on brand, and make sure that packaging clearly differentiates these objects. All right, so here's an example that I like. I actually like their previous design better. I was disappointed when I went back earlier today. So edX, you have courses, certificates. It's very clear what's a school versus a course, but a course and a certificate, they use this darker background, which helps show, it says 3 courses, so I can kind of see the relationship between those. And it actually shows whether this is a professional certificate or they have like mini bachelor programs and mini master programs on edX, which is very cool. Now, what they used to do that I really liked was they actually showed a little bit of a stacking graphic. So it kind of looked a little bit denser because it was actually a series of courses. So this is almost like skeuomorphism 2.0, if you're familiar with skeuomorphism. So this is like skeuomorphism done right, okay? We're still gonna use the medium of the web. We're not gonna try to give the calendar a bunch of leather stitching, but can we actually reinforce the relationship of these things through some visual design? So not only differentiating them, can we actually show that a certificate show and not just tell, right? Because we can tell with labeling, which is great, but can we also show with visual design that the certificate is actually a series of courses? YouTube is also doing a good job here. This is my friend Havana's channel, and you can see her uploads, you can see her created playlists, and you can see her subscriptions. And it's very clear visually that a playlist is going to be multiple things. It tells you how many, it's got a little list icon, the data below, it says view full playlist. I think that it's very clear what the difference between these are. And even the way that they have the kind of this block, you guys can see my, what is this thing called? My mouse, right? Yes, you can. Cool, thanks. Yeah, so they have this sort of like overlay here, which changes the ratio too, like very visually. Like, I mean, I can stand back you can do that, stand back and blur your eyes. Can you see the difference between them? And then I love putting people in circles. Some visual designers might be like, it's so overdone. That's good. That's good. We need some more of these cross-platform conventions. Put people in circles all day. Look, I should be in a circle right now. I'm in a square. Why am I in a square? Put me in a circle. Faces are circles, right? So it's easier. And the more that we reinforce these kind of patterns, even amongst ourselves as a community, the better. There's other places we can be creative. All right, let's save our creativity, not for deciding whether to put people in circles or not. Let's just always put people in circles and save that mental bandwidth for something, for bigger problem solving. I love all these, like the hearts and the thumbs ups and the light. That's kind of fun. That makes doing a virtual presentation much more engaging. It's almost like I can see your faces. All right, so yeah, video, playlist, and channel, easy to tell the difference between those. I lost my mouse. There we go. Okay, so we got to our first OUX law. There's 4 laws. All right, this is very simple. Different objects should look different. That's it. That's all. Different objects should look different, but you got to figure out what your objects are first, which is easier said than done. That can be kind of hard. And so definitely an art and science to figuring out what your objects actually are. Got to figure those out, and then you can differentiate them. Okay, isolated objects. These are objects that are disconnected from their related objects. So objects have relationships in context. And we got to make sure that those relationships are clear because the relationships help define the thing. So one of my very favorite clients, Curriculum Advantage, they have a product called ClassWorks. This is their old class detail screen. Usually it's a longer list of assignments. I was in a test environment. So you got all these assignments down the side. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got actually from talking to customer service, I was showing them this screen, and I was asking the customer service representatives, what's the biggest complaint you have about this screen? And they said, oh, they want to see the students that they have in the class. They're always like, why can't I see my students that are in the class? So this goes back to that real world mental model. A teacher, every day, always, they are going to have, this is just the truth of their world. We have classes and we have students. And a class has many students, and a student, if they're in elementary school, usually has one class. And then if they're older, they're going to have multiple classes. Like, that's just how it works. A class has many students, though. That the truth of that system is not represented in the digital world. And that's what we want to do. We want, when a teacher opens up the app, we want them to look at that and then to be like, oh yeah, here's all my things. And they just connect just the way that they do in the real world. So now I can go and I can navigate through and I can get stuff done. Okay. So Airbnb has a really interesting example. So this is a neighborhood detail page of Mitte. And on this detail page, I can see landmarks, tips from locals, things to do in Mitte. What is missing from this neighborhood on Airbnb? What do we not have here? Let me know in the comments. What's missing? I'll scroll through again. It scrolls kind of fast. Got landmarks, tips, experiences, the food scene, which I guess is like other lists. What's missing? Yeah, Airbnb's links to rentals, right? So I can see this beautiful, if I go and I search for rentals, I can find this beautiful rental in central Mitte. And what's missing from this screen? The neighborhood. Okay, but maybe a map is missing too, but the actual neighborhood. So I've got this beautiful detail page of a neighborhood. So they have neighborhood objects. They've got listing objects, but they're not connected at all. I can't navigate between them. And that's a real world mental model. Listings are in neighborhoods and a neighborhood has listings. That's just the way that every single user of Airbnb is going to think about it, but they don't connect. And they're doing themselves a disservice. They're not just doing their users a disservice. They're preventing actual recirculation and cross-linking and improving the ability for users to explore and wander through their experience and find the place that's going to be the best for them. So I don't know. I think that they created those neighborhood pages for SEO or something for experiences, and then they just let them languish. I don't know. If anybody works at Airbnb, let me know if you have any idea. All right. So Roderick has this great example. Any users of Microsoft Teams? I don't have the pleasure of using Microsoft Teams, but you may commiserate here. So apparently, I'm just going to read what he says. I'm going to do the cardinal rule of not reading from the screen. I'm going to do it. So Roderick says, Microsoft Teams is the most painful app I have to use at work. One example is when reading a Teams channel that I have pinned to the top of my Teams list. I think that's over here. Here's his pinned channels. I need to visit a different channel on the same team. So he needs to navigate between channels on the same team. It is impossible to access the main team from within the pinned channel. A pinned channel is disconnected from its parent team and adds a lot of frustration and motor fatigue. When I want to jump between channels, I have to carefully scroll through many teams and channels to find what I'm looking for instead of allowing me to navigate freely within a team. So teams have many channels. A channel has one parent team. That is just the truth of the system. That's just how the system works. And yet it is not actually manifested in the navigation here. So a team, you can navigate from a team to channels, but it looks like you can't navigate from a channel back up to a team. And I'm not sure if it's just if you pinned that channel or if it's all channels. But in the case of a pinned channel, at least in this example, you can't go back up to the team. So this is a Roderick's solution here. Do some breadcrumb nav. That's one way to do it so that you can navigate between these relationships. All right, this is a site that I redesigned. This is the before, not the after. This is the 2016 Georgia Tech Research Institute had this website with a very dense navigation. Imagine squishing that down to mobile. So they wanted to go responsive. So that's why they brought us in. And so we've got primary, secondary, tertiary. Basically, we've got a series of pages that are all isolated. So it's just a long list of HTML without any links. All the linking kind of has to be done in that sidebar. So when we ran a workshop with them, and this is what I recommend you do, help your clients or help your company figure out what are the important things, what are the objects, right? Then figure out how do those objects connect, okay? Because there's two reasons we want to do this. We want to do this because, one, the connections are going to drive the navigation. There is nothing intuitive about navigating a list of links along the top or along the side or a bunch of little drop downs. We still need that. I'm not saying to get rid of your global navigation. We need that. That's your fire escape. The main navigation should be through the content, through those relationships, those natural relationships. So from here, I can see that I can be at a core competency like robotics. I can see all the initiatives. I can click into an initiative from robotics like Mars robot that we're building this Mars robot. And then I can see, oh, here's the person that's leading that initiative. And then from that, I can see the lab that they work in. And then I might be thinking, so here's the second reason. Here's the second reason why we want to show the connections and make sure we figure it out, because if we don't figure it out, there's no way we can properly represent it to our users, right? So we got to figure it out first. So we figured out to help drive and design the navigation. And then also to help define the things, because you might be thinking, oh, what's the difference between a lab and a location? But once we see that relationship, we see that a location has many labs and a lab has one location. We can kind of get to the bottom of it. We can think, okay, a location is probably a building, and a lab, like an address, and a lab is probably like a room or a part of that building. So the relationships with it give context, right? It shows how do we define something within a certain space. So here's the redesign. And you can see we still have a top navigation. It's just much simplified. And if you go to gtri.edu, you can play with this. It hasn't been updated since about 2017. So it's languishing right now. I need to contact them and tell them they need to work on their website. But the good news is the content, and then adding content in, you can see that that's still really working for them. So here we can go and we can navigate through the content. We don't ever have to touch that top navigation if we don't want to, because all of the relationships are baked in through what I call nested objects. So we have an object and then we have the relationships through these nested objects. Okay, so our second law is the OUX law of relationships. Real world relationships should be reflected in the digital navigation. Got to figure out those relationships and then just make sure that they manifest, because that's how your users are going to expect to be able to navigate between those. Just like the teachers in ClassWorks expecting to be able to navigate to a student from a class. All right, now we've got broken objects. So these are objects that are not directly manipulable and are disconnected from their calls to action, from their CTAs. Okay, so this is one of my favorite examples. So Netflix, we talked about Netflix before, not doing so well with their masked objects, but they also have broken objects. So if you haven't watched My Octopus Teacher, that's another recommendation. I absolutely love that documentary. And I loved it so much. The next day I was on my computer, on my laptop in the middle of a work day and thinking, you know what are we going to watch tonight? Let's see. Natalie, you might like this other one that I'm about to mention. So basically what I did is I was like, okay, Netflix, help me out here. If I liked My Octopus Teacher, what else am I going to like, right? What else are you going to recommend? So I go to this little detail overlay thing and I find exactly what I'm looking for. This more like this. And I see the code, also very good. A hidden mathematical code governing the universe with the power to explain everything from shapes to serial killers. Yes, okay, add to watch list. Definitely want to watch that. That looks awesome. How do I add it? How do I add it to my watch list? So I'm like, well, I could click on it, but I'm pretty sure it's going to start playing. So I'm like right-clicking on it and, like just trying to hover in every little corner. Like, where are my buttons here? How do I actually add this to? I can only play it. So I start playing it, and now I'm like, okay, maybe it's in here. And I'm like going through all this interface, trying to find the add to watch list. And I'm like, do I just need to watch this for a little bit so that, because when it shows up on, when I go to my set top, I don't want to have to search it because that's annoying. To search it on the TV, I just want it to show up on my watch list. So I'm like, maybe I should just start watching it a little bit so that it like can show as like recently watched. And I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. It's like a ridiculous workaround. Where is my add to watch list? So I back up and I search the code and I find this puppy right here with my big add to watch list. So this one is not broken. The one we saw before where I didn't have calls to action on the thing, there were no calls to action, that's a broken object. The call to action exists. There's no reason to not put it there. Just a total oversight. So you don't want to disconnect the action from the actual thing. This example too, so I use Google Forms right now for the certification test. So this is basically, if you've ever used Google Forms for testing, this will be familiar to you. So here I am in a question before I go into edit mode. Now I go into edit mode and I have like inline editing. I can edit the question, I can edit the answer. What if I want to edit the point value? I'm going to just click this point value because I mean, maybe clicking the answer key, but that's not really, I don't want to edit the answer key. I want to edit the point value. So I'm clicking this, rage clicking it, nothing happens. Turns out I do have to go into the answer key. All right, fine. I go into the answer key. Where did my points go? You see where it went? It changed spaces. It actually moved on me. So not only was that not the direct manipulation that Google Forms set me up for when everything else was directly manipulable, except for that piece of information was not directly manipulable. I had to go into an edit mode inside of an edit mode. Watch out for modes inside of modes, okay? It's probably going to be confusing. Can you flatten it up a little bit? So that's what my solution is here. And then don't move stuff around. Why can't the 4 points just be like where my line of sight already was? You don't want your user to have to go look around again the screen. They're already looking right there I'll go back. I'm already looking here. Okay, I'm gonna have to go and find it to go move over here. Just right in the same spot. Okay. So my solution here is just make everything editable. Add answer feedback, which is a little bit, that's actually what it is. The answer key is actually adding answer feedback. And then this might be like, maybe this is a little bit too cluttered from a visual design perspective. But what we could do is we could have it on hover so that this just becomes editable on hover or on click. So basically you've created a pattern here, Google Forms, of making all of this directly manipulable. And this is the one thing that I can't manipulate. That's going to confuse me. So let's flatten out those modes. So Kara has another great example of a broken object. Basically, this is another example of modes, and where depending on the mode, she's getting, this is an iPhone notes, she's getting a different bank of calls to action, which seems really arbitrary to her. So what she ends up doing is she does a lot of copying and pasting. So she's wanting to cut this. So she goes into select it, but she doesn't get a cut. She has to do some complex choreography of opening up the keyboard, then reselect. When she opens up the keyboard, it deselects. So then she has to make her selection again. So open up the keyboard, make the selection again, and then she gets cut for some arbitrary. Let me know in the comments if you can think of a reason why you wouldn't let somebody cut without the keyboard open. I can't think of any reason. So this is very frustrating for her. And this is a good example of like kind of the broken object, the object being the selection, which is kind of an esoteric object, but it's basically those words that are being, I don't know what kind of feature that is. I mean, the thing is that, which her point that she makes is it's not because, we can't fit it, because we have this little arrow thing anyway. So like, let's just it should just be the same. You don't want users to have to memorize this, like, oh, like, okay, I have to go here for this bank of calls to action, but then I have to like go somewhere else, or go into this different mode for these other options, especially if it feels really arbitrary to your users. Yeah, it's modes. So watch out for those modes within modes, and watch out for arbitrary changes, because our users have better things to do than to memorize what they have to do to get the cut action. All right, so our third OAUX law is all calls to action should be clearly connected to the object that they are being acted upon. All right, whew, one more, shapeshifters. So these are my favorite ones. So shapeshifters are objects that change shape arbitrarily, reordering and changing their attributes. So if you were thinking in, when we were talking about masked objects, like, ooh, is that gonna get expensive? And is that gonna clutter up our design system? Like instead of like doing that very efficient play of just having a homepage tile and letting anything go into it, yeah, okay, you're gonna have to do a little bit more work. You're gonna have to create more cards to make sure that they're visually different. That is well worth the work done there to differentiate your objects. But here's where I'm gonna save you some time. So if you've got those masked objects, you probably have shapeshifters too. And this is the flip side of those masked objects. So while masked objects are two different things wearing the exact same outfit, our shapeshifters is the same thing, doing lots of outfit changes for absolutely no reason at all. All right, so let's take a look. So shapeshifter, right here, we already looked at this. So when I look at these two things, not only are the calls to action only on one, so we got a broken object over there on the right, there's all sorts of other weird changes, like 2011, like you can only see it when I'm in one mode, but like in this or in one context. But then when I'm over in search results, I don't see that it was aired in 2011. I don't really believe that Netflix did a bunch of research and realized that like search results, people don't care what time, when it aired, but in like related, maybe they do. Then even just like, and maybe we'll give them that. Okay, maybe search results, people are looking for something specific, so they don't actually care when it aired. Fine. But what about season? The fact that it's one season, it shows in both places, but it changes position. So we need to, like, again, these are just tiny little dings of cognitive load. I've learned where a piece of information is, and it's in the back of my brain. I've learned it tacitly. And now you show me the same thing, but it has a slightly different ratio and the information is moving around. It's tradition that I always pick on Meetup. Meetup has recently done a redesign. I need new screenshots. So this is Meetup from about a year ago. So we've got an event on a calendar list. We got that homepage banner at the top, which I think they've gotten rid of, and then the group page, same thing. Yeah, I know. Meetup, especially from an organizer perspective, it's pretty terrible. Okay, so let's just look at whether I'm going or not. So this event needs to communicate my status. Am I going to the event or not? So we've got yes with a green check mark. We've got your next event in a completely different place. And then we have going, so different language, a different check mark, and for the record, that is a different green. So from a design system standpoint, this is a total mess, but also cognitive load, right? What time is the thing? Okay, we've got the upper left-hand corner. We've got all the way over to the right, concatenated with the date. And then we've got it in blue, all the way over to the left, also concatenated in the date in different formatting. All right, just things are, why not just have one? And some pushback that I get sometimes on shapeshifters is, well, would that be boring to the user? Would it be boring if it just looked the same everywhere? And my tough love answer to that, if anybody's thinking that, and I might get that from some visual designers, again, use your creativity somewhere else. That is your ego talking. Nobody is coming to the site to see stuff being played with in design. All right, people want it to be nice and nice looking and ergonomic and on brand, of course, but we don't need to be playing with stuff like this. We don't need to be moving things around and basically pulling the rug out from underneath our users. Just make your life easier, make your devs' life easier, make QA's life easier, make your users' life easier too. What is this? Uh-oh, fresh, cook fresh. Who recognizes this? It's a meal delivery service. Home Chef, maybe it's Home Chef. We've got a meal, and this is what it looks like when it's an upcoming meal on my dashboard. And then what's in my past meals in my cookbook versus order summary. So I won't go through all the little bits and pieces because I want to make sure we have time for questions. But we got some things moving around here. Things get really weird when we go into the detail screen. So if it's an upcoming meal, I get this like slider. So somebody had fun making this like slider thing that comes out, like a little tray that comes out. But if I'm at my past meals or my order summary, I get a whole page. And I mean, the navigation, like we got arrows over here. We got different arrows over here. We got dots over here. I mean, even look at the share icons are different, right? So from a design system perspective, like our elements are all different. But also just like the information that's showing and where it's showing is moving around. So the prep time, okay, we got it up here. The prep time is somewhere down the page. So I'm just moving stuff around from the user for like this. Just no, don't do that. It just makes everybody's life harder. So my suggestion is just to make it exactly the same. Now, if there's some reason why you want it one to be a slider and one to be a full detail page, fine. Okay, did anybody catch the one thing though that we might, so this one on the left, that's our dashboard of upcoming meals. So I might not want this rate your meal, right? So shape-shifting is okay as long as it's intentional and you're doing it for a good reason. And there are reasons to do this. So I don't want you to rate the meal before you've gotten the meal, right? So we could get rid of this altogether, just get rid of it. Yes, because you haven't eaten it yet, so you shouldn't be allowed to rate it. But we can get rid of it. Just hide it there. What I would suggest actually is to gray it out a little bit and add some copy. You'll be able to rate this meal after it's delivered to you. You're providing information and you're training the user. So now they're going to know, you're reinforcing this is where you rate the meal. This is the place where you're going to rate the meal. Okay. So I actually like something like that even better. So if you are moving things around, do you hide it completely? Or do you show where it will be, or even like with permission sometimes, like you don't have permission to see this, you can play around with that. Sometimes the best idea is just to hide it. But in general, keeping things in the same place, again, unless you have a really good reason. This one is from Kieran. So search results, this is a listing in Expedia. In the search results, and then he's added it from search results to his wish list. I'll just give you it. This is like that game. Do you remember that game at bars where you like tapped the difference between the things? You had the two pictures and you had to tap the difference. I don't know if they have those anymore. It's kind of like that game. All right, we've got price change, but once you add it to your wish list, you don't get to see that 10% off. Why? That was his big thing. Like, why am I? That's what made him realize he had a shapeshifter, is because he could only see the discounted price in search results. He couldn't see in his wish list. Just crazy, right? And then like this placement of this moves around. Like, why does wonderful have an exclamation mark here but not here? That makes me think that like in the back end system, this is literally these labels are coming from two different places. Okay, that's like that to me is a sign of some messy code, actually. Fort William City Center versus Fort William, like why not City Center? So here's his laundry list of things wrong with this. I mean, it's just all these kind of arbitrary changes that, I mean, some of these might make sense. Like, for example, for 7 nights versus the actual dates, like maybe you've actually put in what dates you want to stay in your wish list, so we can give that one a slide. But you might want to even have that in the same place though. Instead of 4 7 nights, just kind of put everything in the same place, right? So instead of 4 7 nights, it actually has the date range there, but it's in the same place. So shape-shifting for context, be intentional, be conservative, and be research-backed. If you want to shape-shift something around, just make sure with users that it's worth it. Remember, you're making a sacrifice. You're sacrificing consistency. So is it worth it? It might be worth it, especially in power tools where users are coming in every single day and there can be a little bit of a learning curve. Is all right. That's totally fine. So in your business tools, if you're designing, if you're working on something to some enterprise level B2B system, most likely you can fit some shapeshifters in. You just want them to be, you want to be intentional and you want to do the research to make sure it's worth it. Because sometimes you can move something around because, with all the best intentions, price is a lot more important here. So let's move it up and put it in red. And have you ever had one of those moments where you're like, there, like, why didn't I see that? It's at the top and it's in red. It very well might be because in the back of your mind, you were actually trained to look for it in gray in the lower left-hand corner, and it's been moved on you. So even like trying to reprioritize things, you can sometimes shoot yourself in the foot, and it's better to just leave it where it is and make it consistent so people know exactly where to go to look for a piece of information. So our OUX law of attributes is objects that are the same should look the same. All right, okay. So what can help you do this? So just being aware, just the awareness is going to help 100%. So remember these guys, okay? And I will make sure that this deck comes out to everybody. To Jesse, whoever else, I'll send the deck to Jesse. There's some links in here too. So I'll make sure that that y'all get this deck. But remember, we the OUXers, this is sort of the manifesto. So this is basically the laundry list, or the 4 points of things that you want to do to make sure you prevent this stuff, that you're not just recognizing it after it happens. To be proactive, that's the word I was looking for. Okay, so here's the questions that we answer before designing a single screen. What are the objects? What are the relationships? All right, what calls to action do objects offer up? What are the affordances of those objects, those explicit affordances that say, this is what you can do to me? What are the attributes that make up those objects? What is the most important information that users need to know about those objects? We've got to answer these questions before we go into screen design. All right, this will make screen design a whole lot easier too once you get there. So this aligns to my very favorite acronym in the whole world, ORCA. All right, and ORCA aligns to these. So basically, we're going to fight back with these OUX laws, the OUX law of objects. Objects need to be recognizable. The OUX law of relationships. We need to make sure our objects are connected and users can navigate through those real world relationships. The OUX law of CTAs, all calls to action should be clearly connected to their direct object. And finally, objects that are the same should look the same. We want to keep those attributes consistent. We really want to focus on those attributes and prioritize those attributes and keep that prioritization, keep it sacred unless we have a very, very good reason to move those attributes around. So, or OUX, like we talked about before, it's that philosophy that says people think in objects, we've got to make those objects clear. ORCA is Sophia's not really proprietary process, the top process that I teach. You're welcome to use it, and I hope you do, for OUX, okay? So it basically helps you translate research. It's a garbage in, garbage out process. If you don't have good research, it's just, but what it does do is it helps you realize you don't have good research because complexity can't hide from the ORCA process. And we basically shine the light in all the dark, dirty corners. We do that with our stakeholders, with our business folks. So we bring them into the process, help them understand the complexity, right? Have y'all seen that meme about with like stakeholders? Every time a stakeholder says it's not that complicated, this process helps bring stakeholders in so they realize how complicated it is and how you might be designing based on a lot of assumptions. All right, so it can actually help you sell research. So anyway, we take our good research, we pull it into this process, and it creates really solid information architecture for our UX and for our design and for our screens to actually hang on. And you have to use blue, yellow, pink, and green sticky notes or it doesn't work. So here's some quotes from other people that have been through the course that basically talk about what OUX is. And it all comes down to complexity, this ability to break down complexity. So all those unintuitive objects, they're making life for you and for your users more complicated than it has to be. So this process helps you prevent that. And it also, figuring out what your objects are, I often call your objects like your anchors of understanding. So if you're working in a really complex environment, my advice to you is figure out what your objects are. You can do that by something I call noun foraging. Go through the research and look for the nouns. Look for the nouns that get used over and over and over again, okay? And make sure you understand them. Make sure you understand the difference. If you see two nouns and you're like, are these the same? A real world example from last year from one of my clients is a blood product and a blood sample, the same thing. You guys are using them interchangeably, but I don't know if they are actually the same thing. Turns out they're not the same thing. if you're designing complex software, you've got to know this stuff. So one of my main questions is, are these two things different? Are these two things the same? Get really, really clear on that. So those anchors of understanding can kind of be they can be something that you can hold on to when the winds of complexity get high. You can kind of hold on to those anchors. And you can wrangle complexity around all of these pillars. So not only the objects, figuring out the relationships that strengthens the objects. Once you figure out the relationships, just like a building, they're kind of like the relationships are sort of the struts that make everything stronger. And then those calls to action. All right, you don't need to figure out everything that the application needs to do. You could do that through the lens of your objects and figure out what are all the things that users want to do to objects. And that will basically give you 95% of the actions that need to happen within a system. All right, so the ORCA process, it is a 4-round process. We go through discovery, it is iterative, and every single round we hit the O, the R, the C, and the A. So we've got round 1, figuring out all the questions, smoking out complexity, usually realizing you need to go do more research because you don't know enough. Doing that collaboratively too. Going into requirements, that's putting everything under a microscope, getting really freaking clear and doing it through a visual way. So you don't have a huge Word document. Instead, you have a color-coded Trello board or Airtable or Notion. And then we go into prioritization where we kill a bunch of darlings. We prioritize from a user perspective and a business perspective. And then it kind of comes all together in representation where we sketch out and prototype cards, details, and lists and landing pages as well, going all the way through to testing and testing that system of objects before getting into the details of interaction design. Just making sure, are these objects right? Are they connected in the right way? Is this the stuff that people want to do to them? Is this information correct? Validate that first through testing before getting into all the complexities of interaction design. All right, so welcome to the world of OUX. I hope you are on board. I hope you all become OUXers. And there are 2 easy CTAs I have for you. You can join the newsletter. I put a newsletter out every Monday, usually every Monday. And then OUX happy hour. We've got a happy hour tomorrow. And then a bigger CTA, you can get on the wait list for the next cohort. That is going to be in August. Or you can actually start digging into this. It's 22 hours of content. You can start digging into it now. So that's a discount code for you. You get $300 off for the next, I felt like 24 hours is apropos. You can go to OUX.com/masterclass. All right, that's all I have. Let's talk.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia, for this really amazing talk. It was somehow talking to my colleagues at the development team, because they're totally into object-oriented development. And I think we're almost over with the time of the session. So I quickly let the audience know that they can choose to stay, because you mentioned that you might stay here and answer at least some of their questions, because there are really interesting questions in here. But you can also go to our next session, which will come up in our hour 19, if I'm right, the Turkai about the cure for the common Zoom, UX roadmaps, or there is also the humans in service design with the vaccine, a case study in service design, coming up in 3 minutes or so. But you can stay here. Sophia will answer some of the question here. And let's get to the questions. And I quickly check which are the questions that people are most interested in. So one question was really upvoted high. What's the best way to help teach this to non-UXers, product managers, engineering? Since I have an engineering background in software development, I think you don't have to explain it to developers, but maybe you can explain it how to talk to product managers or other people.
Yeah, for your developers, even developers who aren't using object-oriented programming, who are, you're using functional programming or something like that, they still understand these concepts and will understand the value of it. So this will 100% be an easy sell and help you actually communicate. And I 100% believe that your developers should be part of this process to help you especially with those relationships, with everything really, but this can be a collaborative process with your developers. So I actually have some developers in the masterclass because they want to learn more about OUX, or about UX, period. And this felt like a good bridge for them. So it really is a great bridge for communicating with your technical team. When it comes to PMs, there's only so much that you need to teach, right? It could be just, we're going to run this workshop. We're going to come together and do this thing. And what I have found with PMs and with stakeholders is they love it because it's so efficient. You just go straight into these like really tough questions. Like for example, defining a blood sample versus a blood product and understanding the relationship. And saying, okay, there's a blood sample and multiple blood products can come out of that. And understanding, okay, well, do you ever have 0 blood products come out of it? Or like, does a sample, how many patients does a sample usually have? And so understanding the relationships between these it does usually speak for itself, because another thing to keep in mind here is that graph of the cost of change. What happens to the cost of change as time goes on with the project?
Yeah,
it goes up.
It's the same for any development process, and I think you mentioned it the right way. It's somehow related to the development process as well, and that's something that product managers can calculate in numbers. So pretty easy to understand, though.
The last thing I'll say to that is another great way to sell this is through shapeshifters. Go audit your existing system for shapeshifters, put them on a keynote deck, put them side by side and be like, this is money down the drain right here.
Okay, there are 2 questions. I think they're really related to each other. The one that I pick is because it's really in here as latest question. Is are there any similarities to object-oriented development? I think that's OODEV means. And the other one was about the relationships, the one-to-many, which some people with development background might know from the like the backend with all these data table planning and so on. So is there any similarities between this development stuff and all these relationship models behind it? Or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we organize stuff with databases is because databases represent fundamentally different things. Because our columns in our databases, or if it's a table, right, are the attributes, okay? And if you have a different thing, it usually has different attributes, so I need a different table for that. So an ERD diagram, an entity relationship diagram is very similar to the type of stuff that I create. The object map is a different visualization for it. I think it scales a whole lot better than an entity relationship diagram. Some of those models, you end up with a bowl of spaghetti, and it's hard to see all the relationships. So object mapping is just a really great tool to be able to see those relationships. So the has many and the has one, yeah, I mean, that's how a database has to work, but a database is just reflecting the real world. And that's how real world relationships too. I mean, we could add more verbs in there, add more descriptive verbs, but I mean, that's just like Sophia has 1 LaCroix right now, unfortunately. But Luke upstairs has 2 LaCroix, and me to my phone is a 1-to-1 relationship, but me to my devices is a 1-to-many relationship. I mean, those are just how the world works. That goes into database design. And then for some reason, from a user experience design perspective, we don't think about that, which I think is unhelpful. I think that we should be thinking about it. But to Arthur's question about, are there any other pieces from development? I mean, originally, the reason I coined it as object-oriented UX is because I was seeing those similarities. I was studying OO programming, and I was like, encapsulation, like that makes a lot of sense. It's also going to help you in the same way that OO programming was really helpful for developers to work on teams, because you have these black boxes. So I can work on this bit of code and you can work on that bit of code, and we're not going to break each other's shit. And then we can figure out how they're going to talk to each other. We can do that as UX designers too. What we do now is we divide up our teams by page or by section in the journey map. And that is not, or by feature, something like, or, oh my God, by platform, there's the mobile team and the desktop team. Like, like divide up your team by objects. This team is responsible for these objects across everything. And then this team is responsible for these couple highly related objects. And then when our objects interact, that's we know exactly when we need to collaborate. Just a lot of the times how developers are working.
I think that's a great idea, because in development, it already works this way when you think about this microservice systems where each development team is working on one specific service and then you relate to each other. Really amazing to point this thing out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm posting, I see that there is a question about free resources. I'm putting a link in the chat. So that's just it's a getting started playlist, and OUX.com has got a bunch of stuff on there.
Awesome. I will grab that and copy it over later on to the Miro board so people can find it there as well. And we move on within the Q&A. So just need to resort everything. And in the meantime, while I'm sorting this, you could probably work this also out for marketers, for example, to explain it to them, maybe because we had this explanation to product managers, because I think marketers might think in this semantics for pages where they have to set it up, for example, web pages to probably set the attributes for each single element on the website so the search engines can scroll through it. Is this a similar way of thinking, or?
Oh my gosh, OUX. Well, first of all, what I'll say, the one battle you might fight with your marketing team is labeling, because the marketing team loves to put different labels on things. We're going to call it a product over here. We're going to call it an offering over here. We're going to call it I consulted for a company that built advertising software, and they had a thing they called the augmented line item. And I was like, what's an augmented line item? And they were selling it. They're like, we've got augmented line items. And nobody knew what an augmented line item was. It's a campaign. And we've been using the word campaign in marketing and advertising since Mad Men, since the 60s or 50s or something. Yet they wanted to rename this thing. So that's the one thing with marketing that you'll want to watch out for, is like being cute and like just call it the same thing. It'll make it easier. So but from an SEO perspective, OUX is great because of those connections. Because you're actually creating structured, and so their search engine is like, this is all super semantic. I understand exactly what this is. You got your nested lists in there. It just makes it really clear how all these things connect. So it's great from an SEO perspective. Just naturally good SEO will come out of the process.
I also put one question from myself and just saw it was already upvoted. Since you mentioned the shape-shifting objects, and I would be interested in whether you can maybe tell us if this could be used on purpose as a dark pattern to maybe hide some things so they're shape-shifting.
Yeah, so I have an example that I use in another presentation from GoDaddy for a domain in GoDaddy. And if you're this is kind of like a broken object more than a shapeshifter, but it's still a dark pattern. So they have, you can, if you already are signed up for auto renew, you cannot turn auto renew off. There's like a toggle. So if you're not signed up for auto renew, you can turn it on. There's like a toggle to turn it on. So you can turn the light switch on, but once you turn it on, the light switch disappears and you can't turn it off. Which again, so that would be more of a broken object to turn off auto renew on the domain. So the thing I'm taking action on the domain. I've got to go into the freaking attic of GoDaddy. I've got to go into like a menu, inside of a menu, inside of like domain settings, all the way, and then like go down and like click the thing. And then it's like, are you sure you want to do this? They make it really, really hard to turn off auto renew. And that is 100% intentional. So shapeshifters, is there an example you were thinking of?
Yeah, probably. Let's think about some booking websites which put some prices with additional things that you have there or may have not there. And this section probably might move somewhere not inside. So you have a similar object or the same object, but moving, so shapeshifter, away things. So they are still on screen, so no one can tell that they put it away, but they move it out of sight, so you only see the price, and you assume that it's still in price, but it's probably not because they moved it away and might change the text. So not included, but still the same price.
Yep, 100%. And I would just say to everybody, just watch out for being asked to do things like that. If you are being asked to do something like that, brush up your resume. They don't deserve to have you there. They don't deserve to have UX designers there, and then they will fail, because if all UX designers were like, no, I'm not going to work at the company that's asking me to do things like that, then they won't have any UX designers. But yeah, that's real. That's happening.
There's also one question which was not upvoted, but I think with regards of thinking about people who start with their UX career, I have to put it on the Q&A right now. Can you recommend any simple exercises to start with an object-oriented UX approach?
Yeah, start with trying to figure out what your objects are. I mean, one thing you can do is just audit your existing system to try to find shapeshifters and masked objects. Those are super easy to find. So, or another site. It is something that's going to be hard for you to unsee. So sorry about that. You'll start seeing them around. You'll be like, it's a shapeshifter. Especially those shapeshifters and masks are super easy. The isolated and the broken are a little bit more nuanced. But just start recognizing those. Awareness, you got, for any change, awareness is first. So being aware of it, and then trying to go and figure out what your objects are. And you can do that through what I call noun foraging. It's really fun. You basically take a bunch of different resources. So whether that's an existing system, your marketing site, user interview transcripts are great. So user interview transcripts, conversations with stakeholders, vision documents from leadership. Look at all of that stuff and start looking for the nouns that get used over and over and over again. There is something also, there's a framework that I use called SIP, which stands for structure, instances, and purpose. So once you're like, okay, here's a thing, you got to know the difference between an object and an instance. So an object would be book, an instance would be gone with the wind. All right, instances are examples. So you might find a bunch of mentions of instances. Okay, extrapolate back. Like, what is the thing that represents? What is the cookie cutter that would stamp out all of these cookies? So trying to figure out what your objects are and then trying to connect them. And you don't have to do anything fancy with entity relationships. Even the has one, has many. Don't even worry about that right now. Just write sentences on how they connect. Define the things. Write yourself a glossary. That could be the best thing you do next week, is writing yourself and everybody else a working glossary of what these terms are, and start becoming word police. Because if you're trying to design complex stuff and you're calling the same thing different things and different things the same thing, like, you're just making life so much harder than what it has to be.
Okay, great answer.
I also have, it's in the Getting Started playlist, but I think it's one of the first episodes of the OUX podcast. I have an audio workshop. So it actually takes you through a little design challenge, and I kind of talk you down. I'm like, okay, go on pause and do this thing. So that's kind of fun too.
So great. So you got the answer here. Listen to the audio and do the sessions in between. Take a break, and I would assume that people can just go there. So another one which might take a longer answer. There was a request. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the mental models and the object-oriented UX dealer's choice. So I don't know how much time we have. Can we cover that within a time?
Yeah. So let's call that the last question. It's a really great question.
I think so.
So yeah. So mental models are funny. People have different definitions, and then there's like mental model versus conceptual model versus system model versus domain model versus ontology. So we like to throw all those words around. To me, a mental model is simply how a user thinks about the things in their space and how the user thinks about how they connect. And hopefully they're thinking about it correctly. They might not be though. So sometimes you need to take the mental model and realize like, oh, the truth of the system. So for example, when I was working on CNN election results, like I had to figure out, okay, I wasn't really concerned with the mental model of how people thought about elections because I was designing the results. So I need to just figure out how does this system work, our electoral system. So we have an electoral college, and we've got races, we've got states like Georgia, California, we've got people, we've got candidates, we've got ballot measures, and we've got polls. And all those things are connected. And so I did some user research, but my main research was just figuring out the truth of the system. So what is that real world information architecture? How do candidates relate to races? Okay, a race has one to many candidates because a race might have one candidate. And then we've got polls, and a poll relates to a race, and then states relate to multiple races. So I was figuring out all that information. That was sort of the model of the truth of the system that I wanted to become and show that I wanted that to become the user's mental model, because like when I got tasked with that, I knew nothing about politics. I didn't have a mental model of how our system actually worked and how like ballot measures connected to states, which connected to candidates, which connected to issues. Like I didn't really understand all that. So I wanted to show that through the actual design, how those show and expose the truth of the system. So it's kind of this like back and forth, like how much do you take the mental model and reflect it? Also with ed tech, again, like there's just how schools are structured. And that is how usually users are gonna think about it. But if there is inaccuracies in how they think about it, then how can your system actually reinforce the truth of the system so your users can better understand how a complex system works? Like if you're in finance, I have a lot of mentees that are in finance and doing this very complicated stuff. And we wonder why people get confused in finance. It's because it's so abstract and it's very unclear how all these things connect. How does my credit card connect to my credit score? How does my loan connect to my credit score? And if we're not showing all of that truth of the system, then our users are going to be confused.
I think that was a great final question so I think we have a wrap up here, and enjoy our last 6 hours of the 24 hours. Is it 6 hours still? I think. So enjoy the last hours of the 24 hours of UX, and maybe you can find the link. Yeah, I have it there. So I will post it on the Miro board, and you will find the link you posted earlier for joining there. And maybe you can post in the chat the discount for taking one of your courses again, if someone is interested in joining.
Yes, here is the discount code and the link for that masterclass. So that is all of the content. It's just not all the hand holding from the certification course. But if you go ahead and purchase that, you get a full discount to the certification course. So you use it. It's a little bit weird. You use that discount code. The masterclass is $797 now. The price is going to go up soon. $797 now, but you get that discount, but then you will immediately get another discount code that you may choose to use for $797 off the certification course. So if you start digging into the content and you're like, I want to get certified, I want to be part of a cohort, I want the whole 9 yards, you can continue to barrel through it. And then in August, you can join a cohort and actually go through it with a group of about 30 people.
So thanks for offering this amazing discount to our attendees. And I think we'll leave stage now. Thanks for the talk.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Great having you.